I've looked at the numbers. We did thousands of FOI requests to have a look at where money was being spent. I'm going to say this. We probably need a Doge for every single county council in England.
Like
just
Elon Musk's
looking.
slashing bureau.
Yeah, I mean, quite why Lancashire County Council spent £500,000 on ergonomic chairs for their staff, I don't know. Quite why up to a third of council staff almost never come to the office, I don't know. So by the way, I do accept that with social care, with SEND children, with less money from central government, I do accept that it's been very tough for county
And actually,
councils.
if you look at the numbers...
The culture hasn't changed with them.
Nigel Farage didn't just speak out, he set the fuse. What started as a quiet leak turned into one of the most explosive corruption exposés in recent British history. Live on air, he exposed a system built on fake jobs, missing millions and silent betrayals, councils collapsing, public services crumbling, and a political class pretending not to notice. But Farage brought the receipts, and Britain is finally paying attention. Unpacked with internal documents, financial audits, and damning records from multiple local councils, according to Farage, it's not just a scandal, it's a systemic betrayal of public trust. Secret deals, invented roles, and lavish perks were allegedly bankrolled by money meant for everyday services, streets left dirty, libraries shuttered, mental health clinics gutted. And yet, behind closed doors, officials had been authorising payments for luxury office decor and all expenses paid strategy trips abroad. And just like that, a debate over leadership turned into something far more explosive, a nationwide reckoning with how taxpayer money is truly being spent.
It's very clear what we've been elected to do, and if we're frustrated from doing that, either by national government imposition or by within the administrations of the county councils, people frankly refusing to do what we ask them to do, then it's going to be very interesting. I mean, look, we're going to have some big fights. I can imagine we're going to have some very, very big fights. You know, dismantling all the jobs around climate change that the counties have put into place. You know,
start in my council.
It's not going to be an easy battle, but that's what we were voted in on. Simple as.
Farage made a promise on that broadcast. No more spin, no more looking away. He would follow every pound, no matter where it led. And by the end of that segment, one thing was clear. He had already started. The first crack in the dam came quietly. A single invoice. It looked ordinary, just another consultant fee buried in hundreds of transactions. But the amount raised eyebrows. Tens of thousands paid out for something labelled only as an efficiency review. No report, no recommendations, not even a summary. Digging deeper, Farage's team found more. Procurement logs revealed a disturbing trend. Luxury spending hidden in generic line items. Designer chairs purchased at 5 times the standard rate. Travel claims with no destinations listed. Expenses marked training that turned out to be hotel spa retreats. It wasn't just sloppy accounting. It was a paper trail. Farage didn't go to the press first. He went to the accountants, to data analysts, to former insiders. What they uncovered wasn't a string of isolated errors. It was a method, repeated across at least 10 councils, budgets padded with vague jargon, contractors with no track record getting 6-figure deals. And curiously, many of those contractors had ties to council insiders. In one region, a green energy project received £150 million, 0 pence. The site, completely abandoned, not a single panel installed. Yet the money was gone. Divided among companies that barely existed on paper. The further they looked, the darker it got. Each council investigated told a similar story on the surface. Tight budgets, rising costs, difficult decisions. But the records revealed something else entirely. A dual reality, one where public services were being stripped bare, while council leadership signed off on expenses that made no sense to the average taxpayer. In Derbyshire, a recycling plant hailed as the future of green jobs had quietly collapsed. The facility never opened. Contractors were paid, deadlines passed. Locals, promised hundreds of jobs, got nothing. The council claimed delays, but invoices told another story. Payments made to shell companies, some registered only weeks before being awarded the contract. In Lincolnshire, money allocated for adult social care had dwindled. At the same time, over £11 million sterling, 0 pence, was channeled into something called strategic cultural integration and inclusive community architecture. No one could explain what those terms meant, but they funded keynote speakers, glossy brochures, and a full-time resilience awareness director on a 6-figure salary. And it didn't stop there. Durham showed signs of similar bloat. Pet projects disguised as policy innovation. Office renovations during hiring freezes. Entire departments staffed with consultants whose job titles offered no clue to their function. The deeper Farage's team went, the more it felt coordinated. Not across party lines, but across habits. Habits of waste, cover-ups, and quiet enrichment at the public's expense. As the revelations piled up, one name kept getting pulled into the spotlight. Not because he was directly implicated, but because of what he refused to say. To gain supporters' car. The Labour leader had built his image on restoring trust, promoting integrity, and promising a new era of transparency. But as Farage's investigations dragged Labour-run councils into the storm, Starmer remained noticeably quiet. Instead of addressing the mounting evidence, he stuck to broad statements about reviewing procedures and supporting good governance. But the public wasn't hearing reassurances anymore. They were hearing excuses. In town halls, community centres and online forums, frustration turned to fury. Ordinary citizens demanded to know how consultants were earning more than surgeons, why libraries had closed while PR agencies thrived, and who approved payments for overseas workshops while local food banks were overwhelmed. The most damning moments weren't shouted by politicians, they were whispered by pensioners, teachers and care workers who had lived through cuts, waited for services, and now saw where the money had gone. And every time a Labour spokesperson deflected blame or labelled the concerns as exaggerated, it only strengthened the perception that the rot was being protected from the top. To the public, this wasn't just about bad councils, it was about a leadership that didn't want to look. As the investigation moved forward, it wasn't just about documents anymore. It was about connections, names, people, and the patterns were hard to ignore. Farage's team uncovered a startling network of relationships linking council contracts to political allies. Former Labour advisors now sat on local boards. Retired councillors reappeared as consultants hired through firms they helped select. Some of these companies had no offices, no employees, just a name, a bank account, and a history of generous political donations. In one case, a firm awarded a 6-figure contract for strategic engagement was tied to a campaign donor. The project produced no measurable results, but the invoices were paid in full and the trail ended there. Then came the whistleblowers. Former staffers who'd been pushed out for asking the wrong questions. Their stories were eerily similar. Budgets manipulated after meetings, reports rewritten and warnings buried. A few had signed NDAs, others risked legal threats to speak up. In Kent, one high-ranking official quietly approved over £300,000 sterling 0 pence in expenses under a vague initiative called International Collaboration. That money paid for first-class flights, luxury hotels and chauffeur-driven cars in Dubai, Brussels and Berlin. The results? Glossy photos and vague summaries. No tangible benefit to the community. This wasn't sloppy governance, it was a machine built to feed itself. The tipping point didn't come in Parliament, it came in Darbasha. At a Reform UK town hall, residents packed the room, many standing shoulder to shoulder, holding bills, letters, photos. Mother raised an image of her disabled son and told the crowd there was no funding for his care. Yet the same council had spent thousands on rebranding campaigns and overseas retreats. She wasn't alone. A retired care worker stepped forward, detailing how her team was gutted while the council hired well-being experience facilitators at £60,000 sterling 0 pence a year. A builder spoke next, his taxes rising while his son's school closed to become temporary housing for migrant arrivals. The stories kept coming, but it wasn't just grief, it was clarity. For many, this was the first time they saw the whole picture. While their world was shrinking, someone else's world was expanding. On their dime. And what stung the most? No answers. No accountability. Starmer's office issued another generic statement. No specifics, no apologies, just abstract promises to review operations. Meanwhile, Reform UK offered receipts, budgets, names. Proof people weren't just angry, they were awake. And when Farage stood up and said this wasn't just corruption, it was decay, the room didn't cheer. It went silent, because they already knew they'd just never had the evidence before. While financial scandals lit up headlines, another crisis had been brewing just beneath the surface, one that local councils were drowning in, but Westminster barely acknowledged. The migrant surge, quietly and often without warning, towns across the UK were being ordered to house hundreds of asylum seekers. Hotels were block booked, care homes were repurposed, disused schools were converted into shelters, all with just days' notice. No public consultation, no infrastructure planning, and crucially, no funding. In one Midlands town, over 200 migrants were placed in a crumbling hotel with no staff, no medical access, and no translators. Emergency services scrambled. Local schools were told to prepare for non-English speaking students without any additional resources. Council budgets were wrecked. One borough spent over £2 million sterling, 0 pence in a year, just on temporary housing. Money originally earmarked for road repairs and children's services. And when residents protested, they were ignored. In seaside towns like Skegness and Hastings, entire streets of guest houses were transformed into government-funded shelters. Tourism collapsed. Small businesses folded. Frustration turned into desperation. Farage raised the alarm. Again, this wasn't xenophobia, it was mismanagement. People weren't angry at migrants, they were furious at a system that dumped responsibility onto local councils without tools, plans, or transparency. While Westminster looked the other way. Behind the scenes, the chaos had been anticipated. Months before local councils began to crack under pressure, internal Home Office documents flagged the exact risks now playing out on Britain's streets. Marked confidential, these memos warned ministers that emergency housing schemes were pushing local governments toward financial collapse. Officials described overstretched services, surging costs, and severe mental health strain across affected regions. But instead of action, the response was chillingly simple: keep quiet. Council leaders were urged to remain cooperative. No public complaints, no press briefings, no pleas for emergency funding, just silent compliance. The documents never saw the light of day, until Farage's team got hold of them. Within days, excerpts were read aloud on live radio. The reaction was immediate. Furious callers flooded in. News channels tried to play catch-up, and online the story exploded. Here was proof that both Labour and Conservative leadership had known the damage these policies would cause, yet chose silence over support. Not only had councils been set up to fail, they were expected to cover it up. And for many watching, that wasn't just incompetence, it was betrayal, signed and sealed in Whitehall and stamped confidential so no one would notice. By the time Parliament reconvened, the mood in the country had changed. This wasn't just another scandal cycle, it was a shift in the national temperature. The questions people were asking had evolved. From who's to blame to why have we put up with this for so long? Farage, once a fringe figure to some, now stood at the centre of a political realignment. Reform UK wasn't just collecting protest votes, it was gaining traction in Labour heartlines and disillusioned Tory towns alike. Not because of ideology, but because of one thing: action. While other parties offered platitudes, Farage demanded audits. While Starmer dodged with polished phrases, Reform released spending spreadsheets. While Westminster argued over optics, ordinary people showed up to meetings with council tax bills, housing complaints, and real stories. The old left vs right script had collapsed. The new divide was crystal clear: those who benefit from the system and those paying for it. And Farage? He threw down the gauntlet. A full freeze on external consultants, mandatory publication of every council contract, an independent commission to investigate fraud across local authorities, a cap on council tax until waste was eliminated. The response wasn't applause, it was momentum, because this wasn't just political theatre anymore. It was personal. It was about schools turning to shelters, food banks overflowing, and luxury expenses approved while public services collapsed. Starmer could ignore it for now. He could downplay, deflect, delay, but the movement was already moving without him. The people weren't asking for change, they were demanding it. And for the first time in a long time, they believed it might actually come. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more updates like this.